Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Tuesday, December 24th, 2024, which I actually intend to get up the day I'm filming because, like so many other people, I have holiday plans that I need to get to in the next couple of days, so time is ticking away, and I should probably stop with my preamble and get into things. So, as always with these AM reading videos, I'm going to start with my next short story that I'm reading in a literary magazine. Right now, I'm currently reading from the Ocean State Review. This is volume 13, number 1. And I got my place here so that I can check the title page for this story, which is The Man in the Photo by Adres and Ordorica. So this is a relatively short story where a protagonist is looking at this old photo. It's the only evidence I think he has of one particular relationship in his life that he had with an exchange student. It seems like this man is a British citizen, a little bit older, who has a relationship with a less experienced younger man who's a U.S. Foreign exchange student in Britain at the time. And a lot of the memories have to do with him sort of, being this young man's sort of first love and getting him like acculturated to sort of culturally adult things like wine and then of course also, sex and stuff like that. It's definitely a sexually active story about relationships. And it also just has to do with, I guess, this sort of archetypal relationship between older men and younger men, and how it kind of, at least in this story, it feeds into the fact that it's a fleeting relationship, and this protagonist knows that. I guess it seems like more or less from the beginning that this is just going to be, something fleeting, and that it also mirrors things that happened to him when he was much younger, that, he was with older men who ultimately left him, especially in his first relationship. I think it's some beautiful writing about, how, you look back and ruminate on the choices you make and why, even, even when it, you're following a pattern in your life, you can still kind of feel bad about it, like, why was I so callous with somebody when somebody, in my past did that to me, and are you doing okay now? I don't know. And meanwhile, in my past, I was, standoffish and defensive, and, there's some metaphors in here about how he wanted to be a bird and fly away, which I thought was a little too pat. But yeah, overall, I thought it was, a ruminative story about this sort of relationship. Speaking of gay relationships kind of being at the center of the story, maybe less so in this case, well, it's They're Going to Love You by Meg Howrey, which is actually the book she wrote, I think, most recently in 2022. I am currently in the middle of a Meg Howrey author's backlist reading project. So last week I talked about one book. This week I'm talking about this book. And so this book follows Carlisle, who is she is the daughter of two dancers who ultimately grow apart, in part because her father, Robert, is obviously a gay man. And at the time, it's in this past, I think Carlisle's supposed to be born in the 70s or something. And so, it's not a time for, openness in gay relationships, and he actually wants to stay married to his wife, but she doesn't ultimately want that. And there's also issues that she was a dancer, but then she got pregnant and she had an injury, so she ultimately, moves away from it all, from, their house on Bank Street in New York, which is as a central part of the novel, and she takes her, she's pregnant and keeps her daughter away from Robert for a while. And becomes a physical therapist in her own right and remarries and has another child. But ultimately she decides that Carlisle should be in her father's life again, and Robert, meanwhile, has gotten into a relationship with a man who's about 10 years younger than him, named James. And this relationship is actually a long-lasting relationship. It has its emotional ups and downs, because of, particularly James's emotionality, I think, and his depression. But it's about Carlisle trying to fit in, and I think she gravitates toward wanting to be a dancer as well, and like, you know, goes to dance schools in her formative years, in part because I think she's trying to be part of the world her father's part of. Like, he was famously a part of a dance group that then he ultimately left, and James is a dancer, and Carlisle is too tall to be a ballet dancer, but she tries for a while and ultimately goes into choreography. But it feels like it's really about her trying to be part of her father's world, and Carlisle's a character who feels very much like she's second best, like that her father loves James the most, and then her mother loves, you know, her new husband and her new child the most. So I don't know, that I had some feelings, I guess, about that. You know, when you're not necessarily romantically attached to someone, I think it's easy to feel that way about the other people in your lives. I don't know. I identified a lot with aspects of Carlisle, which I think made me like this story even more than I might have already. That, you know, she's hard on herself and kind of holds herself at a little bit of a distance from people. And then there's this ultimate, you know, technically this story is told in two kind of timelines. I think it's something she kind of did in her last story too, which is kind of weird. But, well, this is two different timelines. And like the sort of modern day timeline, Robert is dying, and he and Carlisle have been estranged for 19 years after this, you know, big break that, you know, that we're going to hear more about in, you know, the formative storyline, where, you know, we go back through the years of Carlisle's relationship with Robert and James, starting when she was a young girl and into a teenager, and then ultimately they have this big break when she's about 24. And I guess you know, when the big break happened, I guess I have mixed feelings about why it all went down the way it did, and it felt like it was a bit of a, well, it was over dramatic, but then it was sort of culminated into the fact that, you know, during this big, you know, betrayal that Carlisle, you know, apparently did, James attempted suicide during that time. And so I'm not doing a very great job, I think, explaining it, because in a way I think I'm trying to keep some things spoilery. But it really is very much about relationships and about sort of trying to find our potential, and how people struggle, like maybe especially artistic types, when it feels like, you know, they can't find their potential, or only certain people are muses and not other people. But another thing I guess I latched onto was just the idea of, you know, these estrangements, and just how depressing it is, how easy it is to keep the estrangement going and not to really try to fix things until too late. And ultimately I do feel like, you know, she sees Robert before he dies, and it is not at all, you know, a melodramatic, swoony sort of event. They're able to sort of almost like pick up where they left off in a certain way, but they don't necessarily like tie up loose ends or anything. I think just, you know, being together and talking about, you know, their careers and past and so forth is supposed to sort of be that, you know, reality that, you know, we're doing okay, or, you know, we have a relationship, even though we're not going to talk about this 19-year estrangement. But it, you know, it was sad. I guess also it reminds me of some things in my personal life and how easy it is in families to, you know, just stop trying, or let, you know, certain events really metastasize into like big things that, you know, just never end. So I feel like emotionally I was probably even more invested in this story than the last one, even though, again, I do feel like, I don't know, some of the things felt like melodramatic, but at the same time, that's kind of what humans do sometimes, as we, you know, take certain events and just, you know, blow them out of proportion. So yeah, that's my thought about this story. I'm feeling very optimistic about going into my final Meg Howrey story for my next damn reading video. And finally, I'll be talking about two books, kind of technically. They're part of a series, so they go together. The book I finished is The Lost Puzzler by Eyal Kless. Finally! I think I put this on my Goodreads currently reading shelf like back in the end of September, and was, you know, pushing it down and down and down the pike. But now I'm finally finished, and I can tell you what this book is about, hopefully. We are in a far dystopian future. We're on planet Earth. I guess I could say it seems like a lot of the associations are, familiar enough. So in the wasteland, which is now planet Earth, there's been a catastrophe in the past where this sort of enemy race called the Tarkans had been destroyed, but the Tarkans had all of this amazing technology that's currently rusting away, a lot of it. So, like, a lot of the curse words in this world are about rust and that sort of thing. And so humankind is sort of like, it seems like, in two different camps. Either they're like in this cutthroat society fighting over like the remnants of this technology, or they like live in these remote villages where they are completely anti-technology and like from fundamentalist religions. But people keep being born that have sort of these special abilities that you can tell from markings like on their bodies. And if you're born like that in, the remote, fundamentalist villages, you're kind of screwed because you're seen as some sort of abomination and usually you're killed. So in the main story, not the framing story, I think, but the main story of this novel is about a young boy named Rafik when he is 13 in growing up in a fundamentalist village. The markings come on his fingers, and his father, through backstory that I think Kless doesn't feel like he necessarily needs to explain, had some sort of run-in with like some, mobster, like small town mobster from like a nearby city, and he saved this man's life. So he takes his, his family takes his son, Rafik, to, this city. I think it's Newport. I have ruminations about what every city is supposed to mean. But anyway, they take him to Newport so maybe this mobster guy can, take care of the boy. Because, like, if he stays, at home, he'll be killed. And meanwhile, out in the world, in, I guess, the, cutthroat world, these people with the tattoos are called puzzlers, and they basically, we come to learn through the story, have abilities to sort of solve puzzles. And the Torikans and their technology are basically like, it's like the modern dystopian version of like, Egyptian tombs or something. It's the puzzlers, can get people past, the booby traps to get to all of the, stored technology to, trade, and people augment themselves as well. So anyway, Rafik ultimately, the mobster guy is trying to take him around and maybe trying to get a good price for him because, his abilities would be so useful. And of course he steps on the tail of the wrong sort of person, Jakob, who is this like part man, part machine, bigger mobster guy who wants to sell Rafik and, pocket the money for himself. And so like the beginning of the novel is sort of like a cat and mouse chase between the two of them. Ultimately, Jakob is able to sell Rafik to this guild, and we learn a little more about the world building, that like the guilds are sort of like, I don't know, the mob bosses of the world, where they're the ones who are the most in charge of sort of I don't know, commerce and so forth in this dystopian world. So he's sold for a really high price to this particular guild, who take him into the lost city, filled with the most Tarakan artifacts, and that's where he ultimately disappears. And I like this story, although, it's really kind of archetypal, right? Like, Rafik is the chosen one with the chosen abilities, and, that he's going to ultimately have adventures, but then, find his calling as he, embraces this puzzler reality, which of course is much bigger than just unlocking doors for thieves. There's a bigger, plot and play about the Tarakan past and, saving humanity and all of that. But it was more intriguing to me, I think, than the framing story, because the main character of the framing story, he doesn't even have a name, although ultimately he's called Twinkle Eyes. But he doesn't have a name, and I don't think he doesn't really have much of a personality. He's there basically to propel the plot. But he is, this is 10 years later, and actually after Rafik goes into like the hidden city, there's like this big overhaul of of the guilds, and they're no longer in charge, and now there's a council in charge. And ultimately, I guess it doesn't necessarily mean anything significant in terms of changes to the story, except it seems like, you know, these crews of people who go in to try to find artifacts, maybe they're a little bit reduced. But anyway, this character, you know, Twinkle Eyes, is part of a historian society, and he's been trying to track people down who might know Rafik, because I guess the historians think that Rafik is, you know, this big important key to the future, and they want to hear what happened to him. So he finds this, you know, previous, you know, mobster kind of woman called Vincha, and I think actually her title is a salvationist, that she, you know, she had augmentations like so many other people from the Tarican technology, and mostly was addicted to drugs to try to, you know, keep all of the bad after effects at bay. You know, it's a very, you know, grisly sort of world. And back in the day, she was part of the crew that was with Rafik when he ultimately disappeared. And now she's tried to, you know, reform her ways, but she has a lot of debts behind her and is trying to keep in hiding. But of course, our protagonist finds her, and throughout, you know, threaded through this story is her telling the story of Rafik, but also, you know, more and more people are getting interested in her. And in the present day, you know, there's this big expedition to actually, you know, go into the city in the mountain, and we find out very much what happened to Rafik and all of, you know, the big plans about, you know, bringing back Tarican civilization, and there's a big cliffhanger at the end. And that's how we get into the second book in the series, The Puzzler's War, which technically I've just started. Hopefully I will, you know, finish it in time to, you know, wrap this story on up by the end of next week. But yeah, this is starting basically with a new prologue, which sort of gives, it seems like, some backstory for the catastrophe, which is when the Taricans were sort of overthrown, which seems to be, it's supposed to be, I think, about 200 or so years, I think, after current day, more or less, is when the catastrophe happens. Apparently there's going to be a lot of technological innovation between now and then. But yeah, this sort of prologue, it's another grisly world filled with sacrifice and people who are, you know, suffering because I guess the medicine is no longer as good. And there's a lot of radiation, I guess, from the catastrophe as well, it seems like. And we're introduced to a certain character who seems like he might be an antagonist, although this is also so many years in the past that, I don't know, maybe we'll have to see how he threads into the rest of the story, as presumably we'll go back to the present day and see if we can get this Tarican civilization up and running and what that'll mean for our dystopian humanity. We shall see. Ultimately, I think this is a pretty fun world. I think that it's been relatively well received. I've looked a little at reviews and things, and again, I think parts of the plots are relatively rote, but, you know, the specifics are fun, the writing is engaging, so, you know, if you like this sort of thing, you might like this duology. Unless I feel differently after finishing this book, we shall see. And that about covers it for me now. Hopefully I can get this, you know, edited and uploaded and all of that before the main holiday festivities begin. I will be back on this channel, appropriately enough, I think, with a book haul, since I'm, you know, going to my holiday festivities. That's probably where the vast majority, or all of my books for December, will be coming from, so stay tuned for that. I hope you are all enjoying your holiday seasons, and Merry Christmas to everyone who is celebrating. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.